A rainy day at the bakery. There's something about listening to a familiar, comforting voice that makes us feel at ease. It helps us relax, unwind, and slowly drift into sleep. I'm your host, Thomas, and tonight we have a special long-length episode that brings together a collection of stories. 4 visits to Lily's Rainy Day Bakery. First, we'll enjoy pumpkin pie and coffee, followed by baked apples on a blustery day, the perfect batch of cookies, and finally, a foggy day for fudge. To set the mood just right, you'll hear the gentle sound of rain in the background, a rhythmic patter against the windows, soothing, familiar, timeless. I hope you enjoy these all-time favorites. So now, take a deep breath and let yourself settle in. Sink deeper into the warmth of your bed, allowing your head to rest against the pillow. Let the tension in your body slowly fade, and embrace the luxurious feeling of relaxation as you prepare to drift off into a peaceful sleep. Even if you still feel some restlessness or tension, know that with each passing moment, your body will gradually let go. Bit by bit, you'll sink into comfort until all that's left is a quiet mind, a cozy bed, and the sound of raindrops outside. The setting for our story tonight is one that may feel familiar, cozy, warm, and inviting. A place where time slows down, where the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods fills the air, and where the rain outside only makes the inside feel even more welcoming. And just like this safe and comforting space, your bed, right now, gives you that same sense of warmth and ease. Outside, raindrops tap softly against the bedroom window. This gentle morning shower is the first thing Lily hears as she drifts from dreams into wakefulness. She listens to each drop as it bursts delicately against the glass. Try to count them. 1, 2, 3, until there are too many to follow. Instead, she lets her mind wander as the rhythm of the rain blends into a steady, soothing melody. This is the music of the season, she thinks. The rhythmic tapping of raindrops. The soft rustling of leaves in the wind. The crisp autumn air wrapping around the world as the year slowly winds down. A smile touches her lips as she imagines the fiery reds, golden yellows, and deep oranges of the autumn leaves. Lily yawns, stretching her arms above her head. The world outside is still dark, but she knows it's time to rise. Soon, she'll put on her coat and hat, step outside into the rain, and make her way to the bakery, where the first warm treats of the day will soon be baking and the first pot of coffee will be brewing. Although she wakes before the rest of her neighborhood, Lily doesn't mind. She loves what she does. She looks forward to seeing the familiar faces of her customers, to filling the bakery with the comforting scent of cinnamon, sugar, and fresh bread. And at the end of the day, when the bakery's lights dim, she knows she'll be ready for a well-earned rest. With another yawn, she sits up, swinging her feet over the edge of the bed. Her toes find the soft, waiting embrace of her plush slippers. She shuffles into them and stands, stretching once more before tiptoeing into the kitchen. At this early hour, it just feels right to move quietly. The night is still lingering, blending seamlessly into the early morning. Outside, she catches a glimpse of the first faint light creeping over the rooftops. Across the street, her neighbor is still fast asleep. He always wakes up a little later, takes his morning coffee, and then tends to his garden, carefully inspecting each of his flowers, trimming the hedges, and watering the plants. His garden is one of the loveliest Lily has ever seen. She sighs contentedly, feeling grateful for the small, familiar joys of her little neighborhood. Walking to the counter, she reaches for her favorite strong black tea and begins brewing a cup. The scent of the steeping leaves fills the air, rich and earthy. She adds a splash of milk, watching as it swirls and dances through the dark liquid, turning it a warm, golden brown. She carries the cup over to the wooden bench beneath the kitchen window and settles in, wrapping both hands around the warm ceramic. The first sip is always the best. The tea spreads its warmth through her, like the gentle flicker of a fire on a cold day. She gazes out the window, watching the thick, low-hanging clouds stretch across the sky like a heavy blanket. There won't be a break in the rain today, she thinks. But that's all right. Rainy days have their own kind of magic. Without the rain, there would be no reason to pull on her coziest sweater. No reason to step in her favorite rain boots or wrap a soft scarf around her neck. No reason to carry her bright, cheerful umbrella through the quiet streets. Yes, rain is something to be embraced. Lily takes the last sip of tea, then rises to rinse her cup, setting it on the bamboo drying rack. The morning routine is familiar, comforting. She walks back to her bedroom, dresses for the day, and takes one last glance at her warm, inviting bed. There will be time for rest later. In the hallway, she pulls on her wool scarf and felt hat, grabbing her bright yellow umbrella from the stand by the door. With a quiet click, the door closes behind her, and she steps into the cool, rain-dappled morning. A soft whoosh fills the air as she slides open the umbrella. It bursts to life, a bright pop of color against the gray sky. As she walks, she catches sight of a familiar little white cat sitting in the window of a house to her right. She's grown fond of this cat, her neighbor's quiet companion. Its owner is a kind woman who always wears her hair in a neat bun. The cat stares at Lily as she passes, its expression unreadable. She smiles and waves, though the cat offers no reaction. Aside from her fluffy observer, the neighborhood is still asleep. The houses she passes are quiet, their windows dark, still tucked beneath the last whispers of night. A few porch lights flicker against brick steps, and the golden glow of street lamps reflects in the puddles along the pavement. Lily listens to the soft pattering of rain against her umbrella. Beneath its bright yellow canopy, she feels safe and dry, just like when she was a child, building pillow forts out of blankets and cushions. Hidden away under layers of soft fabric, she had felt as though the world outside disappeared, leaving behind nothing but warmth and quiet. She pulls her scarf tighter around her neck and smiles at the memory. Stepping carefully over a puddle, she follows the sloping path that leads down toward the bakery's small parking area. In the distance, the brightly painted door of the shop stands out against the gloom. Swirls of green, blue, yellow, purple, and orange dance across the wooden surface, welcoming all who enter. She remembers painting that door one warm summer evening years ago. Brush in hand, she had let her creativity take over, mixing colors into spiraling patterns. When she finally stepped back, her hands and overalls were splattered with paint, but she had laughed, knowing she had turned something ordinary into something magical. Now, standing in front of that same door, she reaches for her brass keys and fits one into the lock. The door creaks open, revealing the still sleeping bakery inside. She shakes off her umbrella, flicks the light switch, and steps into the warm embrace of her second home. Pumpkin pie in a blustery morning. With a wooden spoon in hand, Lily scoops out the soft, golden orange flesh of the roasted pumpkin, carefully separating it from the skin. The warm aroma of caramelized squash fills the air as she drops each spoonful into a large mixing bowl. She mashes it gently, working it into a smooth, velvety puree. From the refrigerator, she retrieves eggs and heavy cream, setting them down beside the bowl. One by one, she cracks the eggs, watching the rich yolks slip into the pumpkin, their golden color blending seamlessly. Then, she pours in the cream, its milky whiteness trickling like tiny pearly rivers through the valleys of deep orange. Next come the spices cinnamon, ground ginger, nutmeg, cloves, and cardamom, each heaping spoonful releasing a fragrance that speaks of autumn, warmth, and home. The scent alone is enough to transport her back to memories of family gatherings and crisp fall evenings by the fire. This is the aroma of the holidays, of quiet moments with loved ones, of laughter drifting through cozy rooms. For a final touch, she grates a hint of lemon zest into the mixture, just enough to brighten the flavor with a subtle, citrusy zing. With one last stir, the filling becomes perfectly smooth and silky, rich with flavor. Carefully, Lily pours the pumpkin filling into the waiting crust, smoothing it out with a spatula, making sure not a single drop goes to waste. Then, with steady hands, she lifts the wobbly pie and gently places it into the oven. With the timer set, she finally has a moment to pause. Leaning back against the counter, she gazes out over the bakery. In the far corner, a small bookshelf holds an assortment of paperbacks and art books, some left behind by customers, others donated by friends. Over the years, Lily has added her own mystery novels to the collection, passing them along once she's finished reading. She likes the idea that each book finds a new set of eyes, carrying its story forward. Near the bookshelf, a tiny hand-painted rocking chair sits nestled against the wall. She had found it in a second-hand shop years ago, bringing it into the bakery for her youngest visitors. Over time, children had added their own little touches, painted flowers, doodled bees, squiggly lines, and tiny scratches, each mark telling a story of laughter and play. Her gaze drifts back to the counter, just as the oven beeps, pulling her from her thoughts. The pie is ready. Lily opens the oven door, and a rush of warmth greets her face, carrying with it the nutty, spiced aroma of freshly baked pumpkin pie. It's the kind of scent that wraps around a person like a hug, inviting them to sit down, take a breath, and enjoy the simple pleasures of the season. She carefully lifts the pie from the oven, setting it down on the counter to cool. As she washes the mixing bowls, rolling pins, and measuring cups, she notices a familiar pair of curious eyes watching from across the bakery. Seamus. He's been sneaking glances at the pie from his usual seat by the window, pretending to be absorbed in his newspaper. Lily laughs softly to herself and decides to cut a slice. On second thought, she cuts two, one for Seamus and one for herself. It's been a long morning already, and she can think of nothing better than sharing a warm, homemade treat with an old friend. She places each slice on a delicate white dish, adding a generous dollop of fresh whipped cream on top. Then, she carries the plates over to the table by the window and settles into the chair across from Seamus. Smells delicious, just like every year, he says, sinking his fork into the filling. Lily takes her first bite, savoring the deep, spiced richness of the pumpkin against her tongue. The flavors are warm and aromatic, perfectly balanced between sweet and tangy. Perfect, she thinks. Just perfect. As they eat, Lily glances around the bakery, a quiet sense of pride and contentment washing over her. The twinkling fairy lights overhead reflect softly against the window panes, their glow mirroring the rhythmic patter of rain outside. These are the small details that make this place feel like home, she thinks. The bakery isn't just a shop. It's a story, woven together from every person who has ever walked through its creaky wooden door. Seamus catches her looking around and smiles knowingly. Good friends, warm pie, and a rainy autumn morning. It's moments like these that remind Lily she is exactly where she's meant to be. A blustery morning. Raindrops tap lightly against Lily's bedroom window, a soothing rhythm that ebbs and flows with the wind. Every so often, a sudden gust sends a flurry of droplets scattering against the glass with more force, rattling the tree branches outside. Lily lies beneath the blankets, eyes closed, listening to the gentle rise and fall of the storm. It's sure to be a blustery day, she muses, savoring these final few moments in bed, when her thoughts are still soft, lingering between dreams and wakefulness. She lets out a long, slow yawn, stretching her arms above her head before rolling her ankles in slow, lazy circles. Beneath the covers, she feels warm and content. Just a minute more, she tells herself with a small, sleepy smile. The rain patters in waves, like the slow opening and closing of invisible curtains. Wind rattles the tree outside once more, shaking loose a fresh shower of raindrops. Days like this always feel a little more magical, a little more unpredictable, as though the weather itself is encouraging her to be just a bit more spontaneous. With that thought, she pushes herself up, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. The world outside is still dark, but she's used to early mornings. Most of the town is still asleep. Even the neighborhood cats are likely curled up in cozy spots by the window, waiting for dawn. Sliding her feet into plush slippers, Lily pads softly into the kitchen. The first thing she does is put the kettle on for a strong, hot cup of tea. She leans against the counter, listening to the soft rumble of water bubbling within. From the drawer, she retrieves a small metal tea infuser, filling it with fragrant strands of loose-leaf black tea. When the water is ready, she pours it over the tea, watching as tiny bubbles rise and swirl, staining the clear water a rich amber. Bringing the cup to her nose, she inhales deeply, savoring the earthy, malty scent. Today, she decides to skip her usual splash of milk, just a little break from routine. A small change for a day that already feels different. She carries her tea over to her favorite seat by the kitchen window, gazing out at the sleepy neighborhood beyond the glass. The sky is heavy and dark, blanketed by thick gray clouds. The wind bends the branches of a tree across the street, making them sway and dance with the storm. Definitely a coat day, she thinks, sipping her tea, letting the warmth spread through her. When the last drop is gone, she washes the cup, setting it on the drying rack. The sun hasn't yet broken through the clouds, but it's time to get ready for the bakery. With practiced ease, she pulls on a thick wool coat, a cable knit scarf, and warm gloves. The last thing she grabs is her trusty yellow umbrella. Stepping outside, she pushes against the wind, lifting the umbrella until, with a sudden pop, it bursts open, a bright splash of color against the morning gloom. Rain thunders against the fabric, each drop magnified beneath its canopy. And there, waiting as always, is the small white cat in the window. A rainy morning at the bakery. The little white cat at her neighbor's window was usually awake by now, watching her with curious, knowing eyes. But this morning, it was curled into a perfect circle, its pink nose tucked beneath its fluffy tail, blissfully asleep in the warmth of the house. Lily paused for a moment, watching the cat through the rain-speckled glass. A small part of her wished she could stay in bed, wrapped up in the comfort of her blankets, listening to the steady rhythm of raindrops against the window. But then she thought of her customers, the familiar faces, the warmth of the bakery, the quiet hum of early morning conversation, and a smile touched her lips. They were the reason she got up each and every morning, rain or shine, to open the doors of the rainy day bakery. She continued down the wet pavement, carefully sidestepping puddles that shimmered under the glow of the streetlights. The morning was still dark, the sky heavy with thick, unmoving clouds. This will probably be one of those days when it stays dark until noon, she thought. Up ahead, she spotted the brightly painted bakery door. Even in the dim light, its cheerful colors stood out, a beacon of warmth and comfort on a dreary day. For those seeking shelter from the rain, it was a haven, a place where they could come in, sip something warm, nibble on a slice of pie or a cinnamon roll, and lose themselves in a good book. Some customers preferred quiet solitude, while others gathered around the wooden tables, chatting with old friends and making new ones. Her bakery had become more than just a shop. It was a part of the community, a home away from home. Just as this thought crossed her mind, a sudden gust of wind ripped through the street, tugging at her umbrella. The handle jerked in her fingers, and before she could react, the canopy flipped backward with a sharp snap. Now completely exposed to the rain, Lily let out a soft laugh of disbelief and made a dash for the bakery door. Fumbling with her brass keys, she found the right one, turned the lock, and stepped inside. The moment she closed the door behind her, a quiet hush filled the space. The bakery was still and dark, waiting to wake up. Lily wiped her damp shoes on the entry mat, then flicked the light switch. A soft, golden glow spread across the cozy shop, bouncing off the shelves lined with flour, sugar, and jars of warm spices. She glanced down at her trusty yellow umbrella, now bent and misshapen. Several of the metal ribs were bent in the wrong direction, and the slider no longer caught properly, leaving the fabric limp. Well, she thought with a sigh, it served me well for years, but I suppose it's time for a replacement. She had planned to stay in the bakery all day, which meant she probably wouldn't have time to buy a new one. It might be a very damp walk home tonight, she mused, but she was used to this kind of weather. She would simply make the best of it. Taking a deep breath, she pushed aside the thought and focused on the familiar, comforting sense of espresso beans, flour, and pecans lingering in the air from the night before. Most mornings, she started her day by making cinnamon rolls. But today, much like with her tea, she felt like trying something different, something special. She walked over to the cozy seating area, and plugged in a strand of fairy lights. Within seconds, they twinkled overhead like tiny stars, adding warmth to the quiet space. With a lightness in her step, she made her way to the pantry, scanning the rows of ingredients neatly stacked on wooden shelves. "What I want to bake today," she murmured to herself. Yesterday, she had made pecan rolls and lemon squares. The day before that, blueberry pie. Last week, chocolate muffins. She loved making her customers' favorites, but today she wondered, what would make me happy? Her gaze drifted toward a dark wooden bookshelf tucked against the back wall of the pantry. Nestled among cookbooks and handwritten notes was a cherished family treasure, her grandmother's cookbook. She had found it years ago in her family's house, its pages worn and yellowed with time. As she flipped through it back then, one recipe had caught her eye, a dish she had never tried before. Baked apples. A small note in her grandmother's familiar handwriting was scrawled in the margin. Perfect for a chilly autumn day. Here and there, her grandmother had scribbled little tips and adjustments. A bit more cinnamon, a pinch less nutmeg, a secret trick to keep the apple from drying out in the oven. Lily smiled to herself. This is what I'll make today. The ingredient list was simple. Butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, rolled oats, chopped pecans, large, crisp apples. She gathered everything onto the counter, leaving the butter to soften while she chopped the pecans. Once they were coarsely crumbled, she measured out the oats and turned on the oven to preheat. The next part required patience and precision. Using a paring knife, she carefully cored the apples, twisting the blade in small, slow circles to remove the centers without slicing the fruit in half. Her grandmother had written a note beside this step. Use a paring knife and spoon. Lily followed the instructions, carving out each apple until a neat row of hollowed fruits sat on the counter, waiting to be filled. She mixed the softened butter, sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg into a smooth paste, stirring in the oats and pecans. The scent of spices and brown sugar filled the kitchen, making the space feel even cozier. With a small spoon, she carefully stuffed each apple to the brim, then lined them up in ceramic pie dishes. Her grandmother's final note reminded her of one last important step. Pour water into the dish, just enough to cover the bottoms of the apples. Prevents drying and burning. Lily followed the tip, then slid on her oven mitts and placed the dishes onto the metal racks inside the oven. With a click, she shut the door and set the timer. Just as she began tidying up her workspace, she heard the familiar creak of the bakery's front door. She turned, already smiling, as Rose stepped inside. Her longtime friend and regular customer, Rose unwound her scarf and hung it over the back of her usual chair. Lily already had her coffee ready by the time she reached the counter. "Good morning, Lily," Rose said with a warm smile. "How's your day been so far?" Lily told her about the baked apples, explaining how she had discovered the recipe in her grandmother's old cookbook. Rose's eyes lit up. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "I'd love to be your first taste tester." As they chatted about the blustery weather, Lily sighed and mentioned her broken umbrella. "I don't know if I'll have time to replace it before I head home tonight," she admitted. Rose patted her arm reassuringly. "I'm sure it'll all turn out just fine." Lily smiled, grateful for her friend's kindness, before returning to check on the apples baking in the oven. A gift from the heart. Lily glanced around the bakery, taking in the sight of smiling faces, familiar and kind. It wasn't just Rose who had given her the cheerful green umbrella with yellow polka dots and a duck-shaped handle. It had been a gift from everyone. Her heart swelled with warmth. This wasn't just a bakery. It wasn't just a shop where people came and went. It was a home, a gathering place, a piece of something bigger than herself. It was a place of friendship, kindness, and belonging. She turned to Rose with a playful wink. "I've got something for you too," she said, handing over one of the last baked apple from her grandmother's recipe. The other she kept for herself, and together they sat by the window, watching the gray, rainy world outside. But here, inside the rainy day bakery, everything and everyone was warm, safe, and loved. Lily picked up her spoon and scooped out a bite of the soft, tender apple, coated in spiced brown sugar and gooey caramel. It was delicious, But more than that, it was special. Knowing that her grandmother's wisdom had guided her through this recipe, and that she was now sharing it with the best of friends, made every bite taste even sweeter. A cozy morning and a cookie party. The first thing Lily noticed when she opened her eyes was the gentle patter of rain against her bedroom window. Unlike the previous morning, there was no wind, no blustery gusts rattling the glass, just a steady, rhythmic drizzle falling softly to the earth. She yawned, stretching her arms over her head and legs as far as they would go, before relaxing into the plush comfort of her bed. For a moment, she let herself sink into the warmth, enjoying these final few minutes of restfulness before the day truly began. Today was an important day, the annual cookie decorating party at the bakery. She had already baked several batches of sugar cookies yesterday, but there was still more to do before her friends and neighbors arrived later in the morning. This was one of her favorite traditions. The bakery was always a warm, happy place, but on cookie day it was filled with laughter, chatter, and the excited energy of families gathered together. With a soft sigh of contentment, Lily stretched one more time before swinging her legs over the side of the bed. She slipped her feet into her fuzzy slippers, right where she had left them the night before, then pulled her cozy robe off the hook on her bedroom door, wrapping herself in its familiar warmth. Stepping quietly into the kitchen, she followed her morning routine. First, she put the kettle on. As she waited for the water to heat, she reached into the cupboard, pulling out a tin of her favorite cranberry orange spiced black tea, a wintertime staple. She filled a metal tea infuser with the fragrant blend and hooked it onto the edge of her mug. When the water was just right, she poured it carefully over the tea leaves, inhaling the rich, citrusy steam as it rose into the air. She added a splash of milk and carried the warm cup over to her favorite wooden seat by the window. Outside, the sky was still dark and heavy with clouds. The sun rose later during this time of year, so the town was still tucked in quiet slumber. Across the street, she spotted a faint glow from a night light in her neighbor's window, but other than that, most houses remained dark. Lily had always loved this quiet hour before dawn, when the world was just beginning to stir. She took a sip of her tea, savoring the warmth, before resting her hand lightly against the cold glass of the window. They were forecasting snow today, she mused. She wondered if it would come after all. It just needed to get a little colder. A soft smile touched her lips. Snowy days made the bakery feel even more magical. She had always loved watching the rain, of course, but snow brought a different kind of wonder. From behind the bakery counter, she could see children running through fresh snow, their laughter carrying through the crisp air. They would build snowmen under the street lamps, toss snowballs, and leave tiny boot prints along the pavement. Yes, a bit of extra magic was always welcome. Finishing her tea, she rinsed her cup and set it to dry on the bamboo rack, then headed back in her bedroom to get dressed for the day. A bakery ready for cookie day. Every year during the cookie party, Lily wore the same charming sweater, a Christmas gift from years ago. It featured a snowman with a goofy, lopsided grin, surrounded by tall pine trees. Unlike most round snowmen, this one was knit as a stack of squares, making it even quirkier and more lovable. It never failed to make her smile. Her customers loved it, too. Once she was dressed, she stepped into the front entryway, pulling on her coat, scarf, hat, and gloves. Then, she picked up her new umbrella, the green one with yellow polka dots and the duck-shaped handle. Looping the cord around her wrist, she stepped outside, closing the door with a soft click. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, but she still preferred the comfort of being tucked beneath her umbrella. As she slid it open, the raindrops pattered gently against the fabric, creating a soft, rhythmic melody. Every time she used this umbrella, she thought of her friends and longtime customers at the bakery, the ones who had surprised her with it when her old one broke in an autumn storm. It was a small gesture, but one she treasured. As she walked, she glanced at her neighbor's window, expecting to see the familiar white cat curled up in its usual spot. Instead, a black cat sat by the glass, its watchful eyes following her. Then just behind it, she spotted a flash of white. Sure enough, the white cat was there, too, curled up next to its new friend. They formed a perfect pair of semicircles, their fur contrasting yet complementing each other. How nice, Lily thought. Now they have each other for company. With a small, contented smile, she continued on her way. A bakery filled with warmth and sweetness. As the multicolored bakery door came into view, the first hints of morning light glowed dimly on the horizon. Sliding the key into the lock, she pushed the door open, stepping into the comforting warmth of the bakery. She gently shook out her umbrella, leaving it to dry in the entryway, then wiped her feet on the mat. Taking a deep breath, she inhaled the familiar scent of roasted coffee beans, with a hint of burnt sugar from yesterday's cookies, sweet and toasty, like marshmallows over an open fire. She stepped forward and flicked on the lights, bringing the bakery to life. Over by the seating area, she plugged in the fairy lights, watching as they twinkled overhead like stars. Now, she was ready to start the day, a bakery full of life. The bakery door chimed softly as more customers stepped inside, shaking off the rain and brushing droplets from their coats. Outside, the sleepy town was waking up, people emerging from their homes, some walking, others driving, wrapped in scarves and thick winter jackets. Among the trickle of arrivals was Rose, one of Lily's dearest regulars, as well as Gwen Spencer and her twin boys. Lily smiled fondly at the 2-year-olds as they toddled into the bakery, their tiny hands clutching their mother's coat. The only way she could tell them apart was that one wore glasses and the other didn't. Otherwise, they were dressed exactly alike in red shirts, blue jeans, and fuzzy green socks that peeked out from beneath their pant legs. The twins had grown up visiting the bakery, and they had made a habit of greeting every customer who walked through the door. They especially loved the bakery's kids' corner, where they could sit, play, and peek at the treats being made. And, of course, they knew they were likely to get a little sweet surprise from Lily whenever they visited. Seeing them reminded Lily that she still had a few final touches to prepare before the cookie decorating party began. Wiping her hands on her apron, she stepped toward the pantry to gather all the decorating supplies she had set aside. A rainbow of decorations. Lily filled a large woven basket with an array of colorful sprinkles, thin ones, round ones, and tiny gold and silver balls that shimmered in the soft bakery light. Next, she added jars of vibrant decorative sugar, green, blue, red, yellow, and purple. She found coconut flakes, chocolate curls, and tins of crushed peppermint candy to add a festive touch. One by one, she arranged tubes of icing, gel colors, and powdered sugar shakers, making sure every table had a little bit of everything. Finally, from the very back of the pantry, she pulled out a large metal tree with delicate, twisting branches. But instead of ornaments, this tree would soon hold dozens of decorated cookies, each one hanging like a festive little work of art. With everything gathered, Lily carefully set up each table, making sure that every guest would have plenty of decorating supplies to choose from. Just as she finished, the timer on the oven chimed. She returned to the kitchen and opened the oven door, releasing a wave of warm, sugary air. Inside, the stained glass cookies gleamed like jewels, their glossy centers radiant in hues of red, blue, orange, yellow, and green. A satisfied smile spread across Lily's face. They came out perfect. As the cookies cooled, she retrieved the plain sugar cookies she had baked the day before. They had been cut into charming holiday shapes: snowmen, evergreen trees, stars, and delicate snowflakes. One by one, she arranged them on large silver platters, making sure that each table had a plentiful assortment to decorate. But before she carried them out to the seating area, she had one special delivery to make. She selected one of each kind of cookie, placing them neatly on a small porcelain plate, and carried them over to Seamus. The perfect cookie every year. Seamus looked up with a twinkle in his eye as Lily set the plate before him. He grinned broadly, picking up the chocolate chip cookie first. Taking a bite, he closed his eyes and let out a contented sigh. "I think these are the best cookies you've ever made," he declared. Then, with a knowing glance, he added, "In fact, I think they might just be the perfect cookies." Lily laughed softly, shaking her head. He told her this every single year, and every single year, it made her just as happy. There was something special about knowing that the simple act of baking could bring someone so much joy. Whether it was a cinnamon roll, a croissant, or a simple cookie, the thought that her pastries could brighten someone's day filled her with warmth. She gave Seamus a playful wink and returned to the counter to fetch the larger trays. By the time she had set them on the tables, she glanced at the clock, just as the first guests for the party began to arrive. A community gathering. Right on cue, the bakery door opened. A young family stepped inside. Lily recognized them as newcomers to town, and she could see the hesitation in their eyes, the quiet shyness of people stepping into a new tradition for the first time. She greeted them with a warm wave, letting them know they could choose any table and start decorating whenever they liked. Gratefully, they nodded and picked a seat near the door. Next, an elderly couple arrived, visiting town to see their grandchildren. They always stopped by whenever they could, and today was no exception. Taking their seats near Seamus, they exchanged friendly greetings, settling in as though the bakery was a second home. And then, one by one, more and more of Lily's friends and neighbors poured through the bakery's doors. Old and young, some alone, some with family, but all of them welcomed. Before long, the cozy little shop was buzzing with conversation and laughter. The sound of sprinkles shaking, icing tubes squeezing, and delighted giggles filled the air. Looking around, Lily felt a wave of peace settle over her. She couldn't imagine a better place to be. The first snowfall. Just then, something caught her eye. Outside the window, soft white flakes drifted slowly from the sky. At first, just a few. Then, more and more, until the whole street was covered in a delicate layer of powdery white. A young girl at one of the tables noticed it too. She tugged on her mother's sleeve, pointing excitedly. "It's snowing," she whispered in awe. Gradually, the chatter in the bakery quieted as more people turned to the windows, watching the first true snowfall of the season. The rooftops, street lamps, and paving stones were all dusted in a layer of soft, glistening white. Lily found herself wondering if the two cats in her neighbor's window were watching the snowfall too. Perhaps they were just as curious about the magic of winter as she was. A moment of pure joy. Something about the sight of the falling snow filled Lily with an irresistible sense of wonder. She needed to feel it. Stepping away from the counter, she quietly slipped outside, letting the cool air wrap around her. She spread her arms out wide and turned slowly in a circle, letting the snowflakes land on her cheeks and nose. She laughed softly to herself, feeling like a child again. Tilting her head back, she stuck out her tongue and caught a tiny, icy snowflake. She felt more alive in that moment than she had in a long time. And for a brief, beautiful second, standing in the snow, feeling its touch on her skin, hearing the soft sounds of laughter drifting from the bakery behind her, she was completely, perfectly at peace. A snowy silence. Everything was quieter now, the world wrapped in a magical hush wrought by the snow. In the distance, a single crow waddled across the freshly fallen white, leaving a delicate trail of footprints in its wake. Lily glanced down and noticed her own boots had left similar imprints in the snow, and the sight made her smile. She lifted a hand, waving a quiet goodbye to the crow, to the snow, to the hush of the winter morning, before turning back toward the warmth of the bakery. Inside, the bakery was alive with joy. Across the room, friends, families, and neighbors were still decorating cookies, their laughter and conversation filling the air. She saw palm-sized snowmen with tiny scarves and hats, green-frosted evergreen trees decorated with bright sugar ornaments, white and blue snowflakes, their delicate edges outlined in intricate icing. Candles, their curving yellow flames glowing with warm frosting. Some guests were tying ribbons and string through their stained glass cookies, while others admired their chocolate chip creations, though a few of those already had a sneaky bite taken out. In the corner of the bakery, the metal cookie tree was slowly filling up. Most people would take their cookies home, but many left one behind on the tree, where it would stay until the new year, a tradition that had become one of Lily's favorites. She picked up a stained glass cookie, holding it gently between her fingers before bringing it to her lips. The buttery crumbs melted in her mouth, soft and rich. At its center, the pane of candy glass was sweet and delicate, breaking apart like a drop of honey on her tongue. There's nothing better than a freshly baked cookie, she thought with a quiet smile. For the rest of the day, she would help her friends decorate their cookies, assist with countless creative designs, and maybe even treat herself to an afternoon coffee. But for now, she was simply content. She stood there, taking in the cozy, festive atmosphere of her little bakery as the magical snow continued to fall outside the window. A misty morning, the gentle rhythm of rain tapping against the glass eased Lily into wakefulness. She didn't open her eyes right away. Instead, she lay still, savoring the soft comfort of her blankets, listening to the soothing patter of raindrops. Without realizing it, she drifted off again, her mind weaving through half-formed dreams of damp streets and rippling puddles. But eventually, the dream faded, and her thoughts returned to her bedroom. With a soft sigh, she stretched her arms above her head and flexed her ankles in slow circles, letting them warm up for the day ahead. Sliding her feet into her cozy slippers, she made her way into the kitchen, just as she did every morning. A familiar ritual. The first thing she did was put the kettle on, enjoying the familiar, soothing sound of bubbles forming inside as the water heated. Bubbles and rain, she thought. The two constants of her early mornings, both small and simple, yet deeply comforting. As she spooned loose tea leaves into her metal infuser, she found herself thinking about the little meaningful details that made up her life. The steam curling from a fresh cup of tea, the way the sunrise crept through the bakery windows in winter, the scent of flour, sugar, and coffee beans lingering in the air. Lily smiled as she twisted the top onto the infuser and hooked the tiny chain onto the rim of her mug. When the water was ready, she poured it slowly over the leaves, watching as rich amber color spread through the mug. She always loved this part, how the swirling tea patterns were different every single morning. The act of making tea was both familiar and new, a quiet ritual she never tired of. She added a splash of milk, then carried the warm mug to her favorite seat by the window. A foggy morning. Outside, the neighborhood was still wrapped in darkness. The rain had faded into a thin mist, and in the distance, the first wisps of fog rolled in behind her neighbor's house. Lily's gaze drifted to the home across the street. During spring and summer, the man who lived there tended the most beautiful garden, perfectly kept, bursting with vibrant colors. Even now, in autumn, his yard had a quiet elegance, the fallen red, yellow, and brown leaves scattered like paint strokes on a canvas. He must have planted his bulbs yesterday, she realized, noticing a patch of freshly turned earth. It reminded her that she needed to do the same. Outside the bakery, Lily had a small garden of her own, where she had planted everything from herbs to vegetables over the years. Now, it was a flower garden, and if she wanted it to bloom in spring, she needed to plant her bulbs soon. I'll have to bring them with me today, she told herself. She took one last sip of tea and turned back to the window. The fog was rolling in thicker now, swirling around the rooftops and tree branches curling between the houses. There was something mysterious and magical about fog, Lily thought. It's like an enchantment, hiding the world just out of sight. The thought made her grin, and with a quiet sense of excitement, she rose to begin her day. A walk through the fog. Dressed in a red shirt with yellow details, she grabbed her coat, hat, and gloves, slipping the bag of flower bulbs into her coat pocket. Before stepping outside, she looped her green and yellow polka dot umbrella around her wrist. But when she opened the door, she hesitated for a moment. The fog had completely settled in now, thick and soft as wool. The street was almost hidden, the houses barely visible, tucked away in gentle folds of gray. Taking a deep breath, she inhaled the crisp, fresh scent of morning air. The rain and mist had cleansed everything, leaving the world cool and rejuvenated. Feeling refreshed, she stepped forward, letting the mist gather on her skin. Small puddles dotted the pavement, but they weren't deep enough to warrant avoiding. Her boots carried her through them with ease. She lifted her gaze, watching as the fog wove through the treetops, curling around bare branches and clusters of golden leaves. Reaching out her hand, She swept it gently through the air, feeling the moisture collect on her skin. Instead of wiping her fingers dry, she rubbed them together, embracing the sensation, as though the mist itself was a connection to the trees, the earth, the changing seasons. She turned toward her neighbor's house, though it was barely visible through the fog. She imagined the two cats, one black, one white, curled up in their window seat, warm and safe, watching the mist roll in. With that comforting thought, she continued on her way. The bakery awaits. Even though she couldn't see the bakery's colorful door yet, she knew it was there. She had walked this same path every morning for years. She could probably find her way blindfolded. Still, when the first swirl of fog parted, revealing the painted wood, Lily felt a quiet sense of comfort. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let the warmth of the bakery wrap around her like a familiar hug. Time for something sweet, she thought, glancing at her handwritten recipe for fudge. A trio of fudge flavors. Lily knew exactly which fudge flavor she needed to make today. Her customers always requested peppermint, so she would need peppermint extract and candy canes to crush over the top. Rose loved hazelnut fudge, so she would set aside whole hazelnuts for that batch. And for herself, she had been craving something rich and citrusy, orange chocolate fudge. She even had leftover candied orange peel, which would add an extra burst of flavor. With her plans set, she stepped into the pantry, gathering everything she needed. Her trusty double boiler, a selection of the right size pans, a roll of wax paper, chocolate chips, plenty of them, sweetened condensed milk, bottles of flavor extracts, a small bag of hazelnuts, a zester for the orange. Balancing everything in her arms, she carried it all behind the counter, carefully setting each item down. Then, she paused for a moment to admire the gleaming silver double boiler in front of her. It was her secret weapon, the key to perfectly melted chocolate. Her mother had always told her that a double boiler was the only way to go. That gentle heat from the steaming water below would keep the chocolate smooth and velvety, without the risk of burning. Over the years, she had experimented with different methods, bowls balanced over pots, direct heat, other variations. But when she opened the bakery, her mother's words echoed in her mind. So she got herself a proper double boiler, and she had never looked back. The peppermint batch. Lily filled the bottom pot halfway with water, then nested the second pot on top, letting the steam slowly warm the metal. Next, she poured in a generous amount of chocolate chips, listening to them tumble into the pan. She stirred gently, watching as the heat worked its magic. First, the chips softened at the edges. Then, they glistened as they lost their shape. And soon, they became a smooth, molten lake of chocolate. Once the chocolate was fully melted, she poured in the sweetened condensed milk, stirring until the mixture thickened into a glossy, fudgy consistency. This would be her peppermint fudge, so before the mixture could start to set, she added a spoonful of peppermint extract, stirring it in thoroughly. A sharp, cool burst of peppermint filled the air, waking her senses, reminding her of crisp winter days and freshly fallen snow. She quickly poured the rich chocolate mixture into a wax paper lined pan, spreading it evenly with her wooden spoon. The ribbons of fudge cascaded into the pan, settling into every corner, like lava flowing through rocky terrain. With one final scrape of the spoon, she made sure not a drop went to waste. Then, she lifted the pan and gave it a gentle tap against the counter, helping it settle evenly. Now it was time for the topping. From a nearby drawer, she grabbed her rolling pin and a handful of candy canes. One by one, she peeled back the plastic wrappers, her fingertips becoming slightly sticky from the sugary coating. She placed the candy canes inside a bag, sandwiched between two towels, and rolled the heavy pin over them. The snapping sounds were subtle at first, but soon, the candy shattered into tiny peppermint shards. She scooped a handful of crushed candy into her palm and sprinkled it over the fudge, watching as the red and white flecks nestled into the glossy surface. Some of the larger pieces would add crunch, while the smaller bits would infuse extra peppermint flavor. Satisfied, she carried the pan over to the cooling rack, where it would set until it was ready to be sliced and served. A citrusy twist. While the peppermint fudge cooled, Lily turned her attention to the next batch. She retrieved a fresh orange from the pantry, rolling it gently between her palms before zesting the bright, fragrant peel. The tiny flecks of orange zest would add a lively citrus kick, complementing the deep richness of the chocolate. Once the chocolate chips and condensed milk had melted together, she stirred in the zest and a few drops of orange oil. The scent that rose from the pan was heavenly, warm, rich, and slightly tangy. She poured the fudge into its tray, smoothing the top, then reached for her candied orange peels. Lily carefully arranged delicate curls of orange peel across the surface, pressing them down just enough so they would set as the fudge cooled. Before moving on, she popped a small piece in her mouth, closing her eyes as the sharp citrus mingled with the thick, creamy chocolate. Perfect. A familiar face. Just as Lily was about to start the final batch, she heard a familiar voice. "Sure is foggy out there," Rose said, stepping up to the counter. Lily looked up and saw her friend's rosy cheeks and mitten-covered hands, still dusted with the chill of the morning. Rose chuckled, shaking her head. "I actually got turned around this morning leaving my house," she admitted. "The fog was so thick, I thought for a moment I was heading the wrong way." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Really? That thick?" Rose nodded. "Could barely see my hands in front of me." Then her face softened. "But then I saw the bakery lights, your twinkling fairy lights shining through the fog like little guiding stars." Lily felt her heart warm at the thought. The bakery really had become a home away from home for so many, including Rose. Smiling, she reached for a clean mug, pouring a steaming cup of coffee and handing it to her friend. "Well, I'm glad you found your way," Lily said with a grin. "And I think you'll be even happier when you hear what I'm making next." Rose's eyes lit up with excitement. "Hazelnut fudge?" she asked hopefully. Lily laughed, giving her a knowing nod. Rose clapped her mittened hands together softly, her smile widening. "That's my favorite." A sweet finale. As Rose took a seat by the window, Lily turned back to the stove and set up the double boiler once more. She melted the chocolate and condensed milk, stirring gently until the mixture turned thick and glossy. Then, she removed the pan from the heat and reached for the hazelnut flavoring. With one careful pour, she added just the right amount, mixing until the entire batch was infused with warm, nutty notes. From a small jar, she retrieved a handful of whole hazelnuts and gave them a quick, rough chop before sprinkling them across the surface of the fudge. The pieces sank slightly, embedding themselves into the cooling chocolate. Satisfied, Lily stepped back, hands on her hips. 3 perfect batches of fudge. All she had to do now was wait for them to set, then slice them into thick, decadent squares. With a deep breath, she looked out the bakery window, where the fog still swirled softly through the town. Her little shop was warm, cozy, safe, and soon the scent of fresh fudge would fill the air. And that, she thought, was a wonderful way to start the day. The final touches on a perfect batch. Lily carefully poured the last batch of hazelnut fudge into the lined pan, smoothing it out with her wooden spoon. To finish it off, she reached for whole hazelnuts, pressing them into the surface in neat, even rows. Each piece of fudge would have one golden hazelnut nestled on top, adding a touch of crunch and depth of flavor. Glancing over at Rose, she saw her friend smiling, inhaling the rich, nutty aroma as it mingled with the scents of orange and peppermint fudge cooling nearby. The air was filled with warmth and sweetness, the perfect medley for a chilly day. A garden waiting for spring. As the fudge cooled on the counter, Lily realized she had a perfect window of time to plant her flower bulbs. Besides, it was a slow morning, and from her small garden, she would still be able to see the bakery door if anyone arrived. She walked over to Rose, lightly resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'll be outside if you need anything," she said softly. To her surprise, Rose immediately offered to help. Lily's heart warmed at the thought. What a lovely way to spend time with a friend. She had always felt at peace in her garden, but some things were even better shared. And after so many years, Rose was more than a friend. She was family. A foggy morning in the garden. Together, they slipped on their coats and scarves, stepping into the fresh, misty morning air. The garden outside the bakery was small but special, a place where Lily had planted everything from herbs to tomatoes over the years. Now, it was a flower garden waiting for the bulbs that would wake up in spring and bloom into a riot of color. Lily pulled the bag of bulbs from her pocket, while Rose reached into the workbench against the wall, retrieving two trowels from where they were neatly stored. Kneeling in the damp soil, the two women began to dig, laughing as they felt the moist earth seep through their pant legs. The cold, earthy scent of freshly turned soil mixed with the lingering aromas of fudge drifting from the bakery window. It was the smell of the seasons shifting, of something ending and something new beginning. Stories in the garden. As they worked, they chatted about the seasons they had spent together at the bakery, reminiscing about moments that had become legendary in town. There was the time Max from the hardware store had accidentally ordered 12 dozen cupcakes instead of 2 dozen for his daughter's birthday. For days, they had been practically begging customers to take cupcakes home with them. And then there was that summer storm, the one that had washed out the roads, leaving visitors stranded in town. People had flocked to the bakery, turning it into a gathering place. Lily, Rose, and a handful of others had kept coffee flowing, made extra snacks, and even collected blankets and children's books to make the unexpected guests as comfortable as possible. For a few days, the bakery had become more than just a shop. It had been a safe haven. Moments of gratitude. "We've had some good times here, haven't we?" Rose asked, brushing the dirt from her hands. Lily nodded, patting the soil down around the last flower bulb. She stood up, stepping back to admire their work. Rose followed, and for a moment, the two of them stood side by side in companionable silence. They didn't need words to express the deep gratitude they both felt, for the years well spent, for the people who made this place special, for the little joys of quiet mornings and shared laughter. Lily gazed up at the twinkling fairy lights that lined the bakery windows. They glowed softly through the fog, shining like guiding stars in the misty gray. A light for anyone who needed warmth, comfort, and a place to call home. No matter the season, no matter the weather, because the rainy day bakery would always be there, waiting, welcoming, a home away from home. The end.